This will sound very strange, but the day that Michael Jackson's hair was lit on fire while shooting a Pepsi commercial in what was a disastrous pyrotechnics explosion on the stage on which Jackson was dancing is a stunning prophecy from the Christian God of the Bible that is predicting that there will be a disastrous explosion due to a dirty bomb or suitcase nuke bomb in New York City on December 2nd, 2023. The date that this video is posted proves that this prediction was made ahead of time, as does this timestamped email and forensic notes PDF. If you are skeptical, please email me and I will forward these to you. Although it has been known since early 2021 that a dirty bomb would explode in Manhattan in the near future, as you can see in this email, this prediction for a dirty bomb explosion in Manhattan on December 2nd was known since at least September 29th. There are also many other videos on this channel that make this prediction that were posted many days before this video was posted. This very important video explains part of God's big picture of prophetic signs, patterns, and connections, and an important story God told that pointed to September 25th, 2023, regarding the prediction for an explosion of a dirty bomb or suitcase nuke in Manhattan, New York City, and mass evacuation from Manhattan Island on December 2nd, 2023. September 25th ended up being the penultimate step in the trail of signs leading to December 2nd. For a full explanation of the very important prophetic signs that occurred on September 25th, including the 67th Annual International Atomic Energy Agency Conference, that revealed adding 67 days to September 25th to reach December 2nd, the predicted date for the dirty bomb or suitcase nuke explosion in Manhattan. Watch the amazing video titled Bomb in New York City on 12/2, December 2nd, equals 343 firefighters lost on 9/11 prophecy. All right, this video here is, in a way, part 2 of a two-part series regarding how God has used Michael Jackson for this prediction that a dirty bomb or suitcase nuke bomb will explode in Manhattan on September 25th, 2023. And more information has come to light since I made the first part. And the first video is titled Michael Jackson's Bomber Jackets. Michael Jackson was known for his fashion, and specifically he was known for wearing bomber jackets, which hint at the bomb that will explode in Manhattan. And I explained a lot. That is an amazing video. But what I wanted to add is this. So let's begin with the day that he died and demonstrate or explain here that the day, this video is about how Michael Jackson's accident when the pyrotechnic explosion, the fire special effects when he was making a video for Pepsi, exploded, which caught his hair on fire and caused second and third degree burns, permanent hair loss. He ended up wearing wigs for the rest of his life, and also this began his decline and drug addiction. But that date, and so what I'm saying is this explosion of the pyrotechnics, special effects, this seminal event in Michael Jackson's life and in arguably pop music history. This date that it occurred, this explosion is symbolic of the explosion that will happen in Manhattan on September 25th. And so God has used this event in Michael Jackson's life as symbolism for this trail of signs, this prediction that is being made, God is using this to point to and hint at the prediction that the bomb will explode in New York City on September 25th, 2023. This date that this occurred was January 27th, 1984, and it was exactly the midpoint date of Michael Jackson's life. In fact, this isn't actually technically correct because it's 9,283 days followed by 9,282 days, which actually makes this an exact center date. Because if it's even amounts of dates, it's not quite the middle date, but it is truly the middle date because it's actually 9,283 days from the day that he was born in 1958. So this is astounding. The fact that this happened on his exact mid date is definitely a big sign for those that believe that this is obviously not a coincidence and designed by God. And I will demonstrate and explain why this was the case, why God designed it, that this happened on his middle date of his life. It is truly astounding, what I will explain in a few minutes. But what this also does confirm is the prophetic significance of his death date, which was June 25th, 2009. And as I explained in the other video, which is a must-watch, make sure you watch both videos, all of the video, each of the videos. This is an exact 171 months before this date. This is what inspired this discovery regarding Michael Jackson. Because 171 is the 18th triangular number, and in a triangle of numbers, the last number in the 18th row is 171, and 18 is 6 plus 6 plus 6, which in Bible prophecy is symbolic of the Antichrist. And that's exactly the bigger picture reason for God using Michael Jackson. Furthermore, Michael Jackson, speaking of his birth, was born in Chicago, and the Antichrist is from Chicago. Michael Jackson is MJ, and MJ in simple English gematria is 23. And if you don't know what gematria is, Roman, Greek, and Hebrew letters are also numbers, and as such we can convert names and words into numeric value. And when we do this with simple English gematria, A equals 1, B equals 2, etc., MJ equals 23. Now this is interesting because Michael Jordan, the other MJ, was also from Chicago. I mean, he won 6 championships for the Chicago Bulls during the time that Barack Obama was in Chicago. And Michael Jordan and Michael Jackson are considered to be GOATs, greatest of all time. And goat in God's signs is symbolic of the Antichrist, because in the Bible, a goat is symbolic of the Antichrist. Michael Jordan, another MJ, which again equals 23 in simple English gematria, wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball. And that is because Barack Obama, the basketball president, who had a basketball court installed at the White House, also wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school. In fact, his high school jersey has auctioned off for the highest ever amount, more than even the high school jersey of LeBron James, for example, who also, by the way, wore jersey number 23 and is also considered to be another GOAT. But this is also tied to Michael Jackson, who is from Chicago, who was born in Chicago and grew up after he was born, unless he was born at his house, but he grew up when he was born at 2300 Jackson Street. And the name of his street is not named after him or his family. It was named after President Jackson. But it is a stunning coincidence that Michael Jackson grew up in Chicago at 2300 Jackson Street, and MJ equals 23. Now, one of the reasons why God is using the number 23 is that 2 divided by 3 equals 666, the number of the Antichrist. And again, from Michael Jackson's death, we have a 666 connection to the date it is predicted that a dirty bomb will explode in Manhattan. Because again, 171 months is the 18th triangular number, and that equals 6 plus 6 plus 6. So there you have some background here regarding why God is using Michael Jackson. Now, what I'm going to now demonstrate, well, let's just go here before we move on, actually. The total number of days is this number of days between his birth and his death. And this equals 2,652 weeks. Exactly. Inclusive count, which means if you include the day that he was born, it is exactly 2,652 weeks. And we include the day that he is born because it's not an even amount of days. It's an odd number of days, which makes this the exact central date, right? As I had explained. So anyway, the reason for this is profound as well, is that the 2,652nd word in Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance is the word for curse. And it is used only once, which adds to the prophetic significance, because the usage of it, and it is only used in this one verse, is Revelation chapter 22, verse 3, which is the last chapter of the entire Bible, and the last chapter of the book of Revelation, which regards the end times and the period of the Antichrist, which is what I'm explaining here, all of this hints at, which is why this is extremely profound. And when it says that the use of this word is saying that the curse, there'll be no more curse. This is the conclusion, in other words, and the beginning of the Messianic age, the 1,000 years of peace, after the defeat of the Antichrist, the vanquishing of the Antichrist. Therefore, no more curse, as it says in this verse. But we also have hidden in this verse, because it is chapter 22, verse 3, which hints at 223. And the Antichrist will become who is from Chicago, hence the connection from the birth of Michael Jackson in Chicago. The Antichrist will become the president again in 2023, which is what 223 hints at. But also, 223 is the 48th prime number, and it is predicted that the Antichrist will become the 48th president on November 21st, 2023. Currently, the date that this is being recorded, and the post date proves this, as do the time-stamped emails, is September 23rd, and it is not, Kamala Harris has not yet died in a plane crash. It is predicted that she will die in a plane crash on October 17th, which will lead to the 47th president, Michelle Obama, and then Barack Obama will replace Michelle as the 48th president. Okay? So, more Antichrist is embedded. In other words, more Antichrist symbolism is embedded in this astounding exact week's connection here. So, Michael Jackson. Now, let's see, where should we go next? What I want to do is correct something now that was in the other video. If you have watched the other video already, I made an error. It had been a few years since I had recalled the information. It's not, so in the other video I said it was 4,000 days exactly to this date from the death of Michael Jackson. But it actually goes through this date, and then it is exactly 50 weeks to this date. And as I explained, the reason why that's relevant is because the number 4,000, the 4,000th word in Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance is the Greek word that means 5,000. And Michael Jackson died at the age of 50. And that's a big part of the story of his death, is how young it was when he died, at the age of 50. Which leads into what I'm about to explain, the reason why he died at the age of 50. But before we go there, I just want to explain this a little more. So he died at the age of 50, And it was exactly 4,000 days, which hints at the word 5,000, before Pentecost in 2020, the Feast of Pentecost. Pentecost literally means 50th day. And on this day, we had a prophetic sign that involved the number 50. All right. Now, let me just explain this quickly then. So on this Pentecost, which was anticipated to be a major date for prophetic signs in advance, we had Tropical Storm Cristobal, which is Spanish for Christ bearer, Christ follower. And this storm, Tropical Storm Cristobal, was what they call a rare crossover storm. It crossed over from the Pacific into the Gulf of Mexico over the peninsula there, it crossed over Mexico. Let's just put it that way. You know the geography, right? I don't know the name of that peninsula or if it's even a peninsula. But anyway, it crossed over, and it was a crossover storm. That's what they call them, and they're very rare. And that's because this hinted at the cross that Cristobal, was crucified on. And because of it, we can now cross over into life, from death into life. Okay, so Cristobal was known for its tornadoes that it spawned. It had maximum wind speeds of 50 miles per hour, and it was known for the dozen or so tornadoes that it spawned, some of which were in Florida, and if not all of them, I forget. And one of them in particular was in Columbia, Florida, and God uses the name Columbia as symbolism for the nation, and this made this a national judgment sign. Furthermore, God uses the state of Florida for judgment symbolism because it is the 27th state to join the Union, and 27 is 9 plus 9 plus 9, and God frequently repeats a number 3 times for emphasis for its symbolic meaning. And the number 9 is the most important number in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, as from the Bible, it symbolizes God's judgment. And so the tornado that touched down in Columbia, Florida, ripped up a sign, a church sign. It was a literal sign, and blew it many yards away up against a church, and specifically an evangelical church, which made this a judgment sign against the church, specifically the American evangelical church, that Jesus is very, very displeased with for a number of reasons, which I explain in other videos, and also arguably the most important video on this channel. Obviously, when the prediction comes to pass, though, you will know that you need to watch every single minute of every video on this channel. But make sure, especially if you are a Christian, that you watch the 23 church signs video. And so rather than taking time to elaborate any more regarding this prophetic sign, I'll leave it at that. I'll just let you know that you need to watch the 23 church signs video. It's very important, and obviously, if I say that, give you that sort of advice and direction, when the prediction comes to pass, you will know to take it very seriously and watch that video. Now, God frequently pairs numbers together to confirm the signs and connections. And this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter, as the Bible says is required. And that is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination, and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. And one simple way in which he would do this, provide a second witness, if you will, is through pairing certain numbers together, such as 9 and 11. which obviously hint at the big judgment warning for America to repent or else judgment destruction, the events on 9/11 in 2001. But this is an example of God pairing 9 and 11 here, because we have this crystal ball that was known for the tornadoes and specifically the judgment warning for the church sign in Florida, which is 9 plus 9 plus 9. And on this day, this Pentecost, this prophetic date in the Hebrew calendar, we had the official death toll reach 110,000. And I wasn't expecting this number in advance, but I was expecting signs on this date. And this is truly astounding that we had 110,000 officially reported as the supposed death toll from the CVD disease on this date, because the number 110 is extremely important. And what I'm going to do now is just take a couple of quick minutes to explain why God pairs 9 and 110 together. Jesus' official arrival into Jerusalem and first coming was on the 10th day of the first month in the Hebrew calendar. This is 110, and this hints at the number 110. In the book of Joshua, the date on which the Hebrews crossed over the Jordan River and officially entered the Promised Land was also on the 10th day of the first month, which is 110 and hints at the number 110. Jesus' first coming is symbolized by the number 110. This is why on 9/11, the two towers that collapsed were each 110 stories high. The collapse of two towers that were 110 floors was symbolism for Jesus' second coming. In the book of Joshua in the Bible, Joshua died at the age of 110. Joshua led the Hebrews around the security walls of the ancient city of Jericho before they collapsed in judgment. On 9/11, the Twin Towers, which were 110 stories high, collapsed, engendering a small earthquake that cracked the foundation of Federal Hall, where George Washington was inaugurated, on Wall Street. President George Washington was a founding father, and his inauguration as the first president was a symbolic founding of the nation. The cracking of the foundation of Federal Hall on Wall Street on 9/11 symbolized America's foundation in God being cracked. This is because after Washington's inauguration at Federal Hall, he then walked down Wall Street to Trinity Chapel, where he consecrated the nation to God, saying that if the nation were to ever turn away from God, it would lose its blessings. After 9/11, Trinity Chapel was called the Miracle Chapel, as it was the only building at Ground Zero to have survived. It did not even suffer a broken window due to the 70-year-old sycamore tree that was uprooted as it sheltered the chapel from the falling debris. In commemoration of this sycamore tree outside the chapel, today there is a huge bronze statue of its roots. In other words, through the 9/11 events, God was pointing to Trinity Chapel and Washington's covenantal consecration of the nation to God at Trinity Chapel. Wall Street is named after the original 9-foot-high wall of security that the Dutch built to keep the British and the Indians out. The collapse of 110 floors that cracked the foundation of Federal Hall on Wall Street, which is named after a 9-foot-high security wall, hints at 9/11 and points to Joshua, who died at 110, and the Hebrews that marched around the walls of security before they collapsed in judgment. 110 floors and the 9-foot-high wall of security that was Wall Street points to George Washington's march down Wall Street to Trinity Chapel that symbolized a covenantal relationship between America and God. To this effect, Washington's march down Wall Street with the New York Stock Exchange, the building that symbolizes America's financial strength, located on one side of the street, and Federal Hall, the building that symbolizes America's governmental and institutional strength on the other side, also pointed to the cutting rights ritual practiced in ancient Israel that was used in Abraham's and God's ritual walk in their covenant that is described in Genesis 15. a covenant that symbolizes Washington's walk down Wall Street and his covenantal consecration of the nation to God at Trinity Chapel. There are only two nations in the history of the world that were founded not on ethnicity or territory or language, but were founded solely for God: Israel and America. In every daily Bible that is divided into 365 readings, a portion of the Bible for each day of the year, on every September 11th, everyone that reads this standard 365-day Bible reads the passage in the book of Isaiah, chapter 9, verse 11, which is the judgment warning on ancient Israel, which was a raid on ancient Israel by the world's first recorded terrorists, the ancient Assyrians. And the terrorists on 9/11 were from the same part of the world. The Assyrians raided the northern kingdom of Israel first, and then later the southern kingdom of Judah was destroyed, which is why the terrorists on 9/11 hit the North Tower first, followed 17 minutes later by the South Tower. And this Isaiah 9:11 passage includes a mention of collapsed buildings and uprooted sycamore trees. On the morning after 9/11, Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle gave a speech to the world regarding the events on 9/11. He quoted the passage in Isaiah 9:11, not realizing it was a judgment warning on the ancient Jews. He quoted how, after the raid by the Assyrians, the Hebrews did not repent to God, but instead vowed defiantly to rebuild and become stronger than before. And so, like the ancient Jews, America did not repent after the judgment warning, and instead defied God even more. And so, like ancient Israel, America will now be destroyed. This is why, in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, he frequently pairs together the number 110 and the number 9. Both of these numbers symbolize God's judgment on the nation, and paired together, these numbers point to the big judgment warning that was 9/11. As well, these numbers paired together in God's signs and connections serve as a witness confirmation that the perceived signs and connections are from God. After the judgment warning of 9/11, America was given a period of grace to repent and turn back to God, or else judgment destruction. In the Bible, a 20-year period symbolizes a complete period of waiting. Jacob waited 20 years to get possession of his wives and property. The children of Israel waited 20 years to be freed of Jabin, the king of Canaan, when they were freed from bondage by Deborah and Barak. The Ark of the Covenant waited 20 years in Kiriath Jearim, and Solomon spent 20 years building his home and the house of God. On the 20th anniversary of the buildings that collapsed on 9/11 was the sudden collapse of America's presence in Afghanistan, and the iconic scene of this was the U.S. Air Force plane leaving the airport in Afghanistan, and the big number on the side of its plane is 1109, which hints at 110 and 9. Let's see. Do I go there first? Well, why not? Okay. So on this day, this Pentecost here, this connection here was known in advance. I already knew that this date here was important because it was 328 years exactly after this. Earthquake in Jamaica was over a 7.0 something, and it was a real-life Atlantis. The earthquake liquefied the ground at Port Royal in Jamaica, which at the time was the busiest port in the Americas. And the ground liquefied and sunk under the ocean, and 2,000 people died. And there are many aspects of it. I've explained it before in other videos, so I'll just be brief. This earthquake, one aspect of it was also the landslide nearby from what was called at the time, before the earthquake, Judgment Cliffs. And this was a judgment sign on the Americas. It was part of the English territory at this time, and the English in America, including, for example, Cotton Mather, said that it was a judgment warning sign from God. He wrote that. Well, anyway, 328 years is relevant because Atlanta, the city, is named after Atlantis. Okay? And this is the real life Atlantis. And because it went sunk underwater, like the mythological Atlantis. And so I knew 328 because the Atlanta Falcons football team is known for the Super Bowl that it blew, in which it blew the 3-28 lead. It was the biggest comeback in Super Bowl history. It was a very, very prophetic sign from God, but I won't explain that. It's explained in other videos. But the Atlanta Falcons were famously ahead by 3-28 at some point in the third quarter of the game. And then the Patriots came back and tied the game and then won it in overtime. Tied the game at 28-28. But anyway, the Super Bowl is nicknamed the 3-28 Super Bowl. And I wasn't expecting an Atlanta sign ahead of time, but that's what we received, which is mind-boggling, of course. But this sign here, and it wasn't the news of any other football team, but specifically the Atlanta Falcons, were involved in the Black Lives Matter's Antichrist protest march, because the politics of that are Marxist and Antichrist. But anyway, the Atlanta Falcons were involved in that. They were marching. The whole team was marching in the protest in Atlanta. And we have this exact 328 years connection here. Okay, so that rounds out. Now, the reason why I also wanted to explain the pairing of 9 and 110 is just to get you to this point here, which is that this was 2020, Pentecost, was the third year in a row that God demonstrated a stunning parallel of signs with the timing of events in the book of Joshua, which were a trail of signs that climaxed with the symbolic walls of security collapsing on Jericho on Pentecost. In other words, what I'm saying, if you read that text properly, is what it's hinting at, it's what it is saying, is that the walls of security collapsed on Pentecost. Because God has confirmed that, also because God has confirmed that 3 years in a row. The more stunning trail of signs was the first one in 2018, and I made a lengthy video about it, and make sure you watch that video. I've reposted it in another video too, but the original video is titled, "Is Joshua, the Book of Joshua, the Key to Understanding the Book of Revelation?" Which it is. But this is why God uses frequently in his signs 3 sets of 7, because before the walls of security of Jericho collapsed in God's judgment, the Israelites enacted a symbolic 3 sets of 7. They marched around the walls, and I say they marched. That's why the Atlanta Falcons marched on this Pentecost around. It was symbolic of the march around the walls of security. They marched around once per day for 7 days, and then on the 7th day, they marched 7 times while blowing 7 trumpets. And so that's why it was 3 sets of 7 days exactly before this Pentecost and March, which hints at 3 sets of 7, 3 times 7 days, to the day that the death toll officially reached 90,000. And that's a pairing of 9 and 110, which confirms the signs and connections, which is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel. So that confirms that. Now, also, we had a Trump sign on this day, which also confirms the 3 sets of 7. And that's why, well, the sign was, the interview aired with Maria Bartiromo, and in it, he mentioned his wall of security 3 times. And I apologize, I forget now, but there is an association somehow with the time of 1:10, 1 minute and 10 seconds or something. I forget. Maybe there's a clip where he mentions that at that minute mark, the wall. But anyway, it turns out it doesn't matter too much, but it turns out that this is exactly 110 days after this prophetic Trump wall sign. This was the day, January 28th, in which Trump's deal of the century was, and Trump was known for his deal making and throughout his life. That's why this was the climax to that prophetic significance of Trump, his deal of the century. This was the day it was released. It was the details of which were announced, etc. That was January 28th, 2020. And this is, although it didn't specifically call for a two-state, it essentially was, and that's against God's will, and it is the biggest transgression that the world will do, as described in Bible prophecy, in the end times, led by the Antichrist, which will also include making Jerusalem an international city. So, but anyway, the day following this, the news reported how a section of Trump's security wall had collapsed due to high winds, an act of God. So a section of the security wall that was being erected collapsed due to high winds, and this connects with Trump and his plan to divide Israel, God's land. And the next day is also 110 days if we include the date, so January 29th. So, and that gets us to this wall sign here, which again connects to Pentecost, as I'm explaining with the 3 sets of 7 days. But also, what also confirms this is that this was also the day, this was during the peak of the lockdowns. And the big, because nothing else was happening at that time, the big sports news story at that time was the docu-series that was being aired titled Last Dance. The docu-series regarding Michael Jordan's final year with the Chicago Bulls, which was an extremely prophetic year in itself and included many prophetic signs. But this Last Dance is a hint at the last chance for America to repent and turn back to God. But it also hints at the last trump, which is a phrase the Apostle Paul used in the Bible, referring to the resurrection rapture event, the rapture of God's faithful, the last trump, which is why we have this Trump sign on this day that connects to this Trump sign. And you know what? There was a Trump sign on this day too. Now, come to think of it, I forget what it was now. Well, anyway, also when the Israelites would have they blew the trumpets, but then they blew the trumpets one long last trumpet blast before the walls of security collapsed. So that's also a last trump. Okay. Now, this particular date of this sign of this Last Dance series, it aired the 9th episode out of 10. And speaking of which, that connects with the 190 days, if I forget to mention it later, because 9 plus 10 equals 19. But anyway, this 9th episode was prophetic because it was the episode in which during the NBA, it covered the time during the NBA Finals when Michael Jordan played a playoff, or rather a NBA Finals game, while suffering from the flu. So he had the flu during the game. And in the docuseries, it says that Michael Jordan had said, I think Scottie Pippen said that he had said that, or maybe it was Michael Jordan himself that said that he couldn't breathe. Okay, so I didn't watch the series actually. So one of the two said that Michael Jordan said that he couldn't breathe, which is very, very more than interesting. It's astounding because this was also the exact date, or no, sorry, this was 9 days. This 9th episode was 9 days before the beginning, the first day at the makeshift on Chicago Avenue in Minneapolis of the I Can't Breathe protests. The I Can't Breathe protests were the Black Lives Matter protests, but they began on the 26th, 9 days later. And, but they began on Chicago Avenue because the Antichrist is from Chicago, as is Michael Jordan. And at the time he was playing for the Chicago Bulls, of course. And so we have this 9th episode. And of course they were protesting I Can't Breathe because the cop kneeled on the throat of the black man, George Floyd, for supposedly 8 minutes and 46 seconds, which is why they were symbolically kneeling for 8 minutes and 46 seconds in their protests, which is truly astounding because it was at 8:46 a.m. that the first plane struck the first tower on 9/11, which is exactly what God was pointing to through all of that. But the kneeling in the protests was symbolic of kneeling to Satan. And so we had the 9 days from the 9th episode to between these two I can't breathe symbolism things, but also the 9th episode was the day that there were 90,000 deaths, which confirms or pairs with the 110,000 deaths 3 sets of 7 days later. It's astounding. And again, MJ is 23, and God pairs 9 and 23 in his signs to confirm the signs and connections. Since we talked a lot about Michael Jordan here, why don't we just play just a couple of minutes to explain why God pairs 9 and 23 together? It's very interesting. God uses the number 23 to reveal the identity of the Antichrist, the basketball president who wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school. In the Old Testament in the Bible, it is described how 2 goats were used on the Day of Atonement in the ritual on the Temple Mount. In Bible prophecy, there are 2 antichrists, and in Bible prophecy, it is said that the Antichrist will rule the Temple Mount during the end times period. And the Antichrist will be vanquished from the Temple Mount at the return of Lord Jesus Christ on the Day of Atonement in 2024. Goat is Antichrist symbolism. Goat stands for greatest of all time. And this is why the 2 goats of basketball wore jersey number 23, Michael Jordan and LeBron James. The GOAT of basketball, Michael Jordan, played for Chicago, and the GOAT Antichrist, the basketball president, is from Chicago. LeBron James is famous for being from Cleveland and having played for Cleveland and having won the NBA Finals championship for Cleveland, breaking the supposed Cleveland sports curse, which is Antichrist King symbolism, which is why LeBron James goes by the nickname King James. And this was used to point to the president Grover Cleveland, who was the only president to serve non-consecutive terms, skipping the 23rd presidency, just like the Antichrist will serve non-consecutive terms, having skipped the 45th presidency. In God's true big picture of end times signs, patterns, and connections, the number 9 is the most important number, as from the Bible it symbolizes God's judgment, and the number 23 is the 9th prime number, and the number 45 is the 9th triangular number, which in a triangle of numbers, the last number in the 9th row is 45. This is why Michael Jordan, in the exact middle of his career, after having won 3 NBA titles and before winning his other 3 NBA titles, retired briefly, and when he returned, wore jersey number 45 for coincidentally 23 games. And it is why Michael Jordan, in his last game as a Chicago Bull, another city God uses to point to the Antichrist, who is also from Chicago, scored 45 points against the team from the 45th state. Like Michael Jordan, LeBron James also played in Cleveland, then famously left Cleveland in much controversy, and then returned again to play a second time in Cleveland in order to win the championship for Cleveland and break the Cleveland sports curse, which symbolizes the Antichrist curse of Barack Obama when he will return to the White House for his second presidency. In other words, the hiatus in the middle of Michael Jordan's career in Chicago and the hiatus in the middle of LeBron James's career in Cleveland hint at the hiatus of Barack Obama skipping the 45th presidency and returning to the White House for a second presidency. It will be his 3rd term, which is why Michael Jordan won 3 championships and then briefly retired before returning a second time to win 3 more championships. It is predicted that Barack Obama will become the 48th president on November 19th or November 21st, 2023, a few days after it is predicted that Michelle Obama will become the 47th president on November 13th. God pairs the numbers 9 and 23 together in order to confirm the signs and connections and to reveal the identity of the Antichrist, the basketball president that wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school and became president in 2009, and will become the president again in 2023. From the Bible, the numbers 9 and 23 both symbolize judgment, and the number 23 is the 9th prime number. The only grandfather-grandson presidents were the 9th and 23rd presidents, William and Benjamin Harrison. The 9th president, William Harrison, died on the calendar date April 4th, 44, which hints at the 44th president. Harrison died exactly 1 month after his inauguration. The name Harrison hints at Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash due to a bird strike and lightning and turbulence in St. Louis on October 17, 2023. And the Antichrist Barack Obama will rise to power and become president again through her replacement, which is what is hinted at with the only president to serve non-consecutive terms, President Grover Cleveland, who skipped the presidency of Benjamin Harrison. The 23rd president, which is why LeBron James, who played for Cleveland, wore jersey number 23. Michelle Obama will first replace Kamala Harris, and then Barack will replace Michelle. Michelle is the feminine version of Michael, which is the reason for the name Michael in the name Michael Jordan. In the Bible, the Hebrews crossed the Jordan River into the Promised Land. Barack Obama's famous autobiography is named A Promised Land. Obama the Antichrist will promise the world a new world order utopia. A goat is Antichrist symbolism. The greatest of all time, the GOAT of basketball, Michael Jordan, wore jersey number 23 and jersey number 9 when he played for the U.S. Olympic Dream Team, a team that beat their opponents by an average of 44 points per game, which hints at the 44th president, GOAT Antichrist, that wore jersey number 23 and became president in 2009. If you have not already watched the Michael Jordan prophecy video on this channel, the Michael Jordan prophecy video is an essential video for foundational understanding of how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. Besides revealing the identity of the Antichrist, God pairs the numbers 9 and 23 to reveal what the mark of the Antichrist is. Bible prophecy describes a mark of the Antichrist, which if one takes, they will go to hell, and if one doesn't take it, they won't be able to buy or sell, which means they won't be allowed to buy the rationed food that will be rationed due to the coming food shortages. Ezekiel chapter 9 is the chapter that describes the inverse of the mark of the Antichrist. In other words, the 9th chapter of the book of Ezekiel in the Bible is about the mark of the Antichrist, and the mark of the Antichrist involves changing one's chromosomes. And we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. God pairs 9 and 23 to identify what the mark of the Antichrist is. And speaking of the GOAT of basketball, LeBron James, who wears jersey number 23, he gave his name, LeBron James, to a Nike shoe that is named 23 chromosomes. The pattern on the shoe is unmistakably a pattern that resembles snakeskin, and that is because the mark of the Antichrist is a snake bite. The mark of the Antichrist changes chromosomes through inserting a protruding-shaped amino acid chain, and this protruding-shaped amino acid chain is synthesized snake poison. In the Bible, the biggest symbol of evil, of Satan, is the serpent. All right, so now that we've gotten that out of the way, we can get into the deeper reason for why Michael Jackson died on this date and how it's related to everything and how important prophetically it is. So Michael Jackson died at the age of 50. It was exactly 4,000 days, which ends at 5,000, to Pentecost, which means 50. And the big sign on that day was the 50-mile-per-hour winds that Tropical Storm Cristobal hit the Gulf Coast with. And this is in turn 50 weeks exactly to the day that Phil Mickelson won the PGA Championship at the age of 50. Okay, and Mickelson hints at Michael Jackson. So in the other video, I talked about how this 4,000 days connects directly to the day that Mickelson died at the age of, or won the PGA Championship at the age of 50, which, by the way, was a major sports news story. Not only was it the PGA Championship, one of the 4 premier golf championships, but he won it at the age of 50, which is unheard of. But not only that, he won it on Pentecost, which means 50th day. So he won it at the age of 50 on Pentecost, which means 50th day, exactly 50 weeks, and then 5,000 days after Michael Jackson died at the age of 50. Now, why did God do that is the big question. And by the way, that connection is also 1,191% of a year, which hints at 9/11. Okay, so why did God connect, which obviously makes this a judgment warning sign for America. So why did God do this, design all of this? Well, as I explained in the other video, it all has to do with how Michael Jackson died, which is the big story. I mean, how did he die at the age of 50? For one thing, that was the big news story, as everyone knows, that went on for years. The controversy, right? And the controversy involved the thing that was given to him by this doctor, Conrad Murray. So Michael Jackson died from taking the thing. I mean, he was given a drug, but how was it administered to him? He was getting drugs administered to him through things. And you know what I'm talking about. And if you are watching the video instead of just listening to it, you can see I've written it down on the piece of paper here. Okay, so he died from a thing. It was symbolism, though. It wasn't the mark of the Antichrist, but that's what God is hinting at. The thing is the mark of the Antichrist. And when this prediction comes to pass, it will prove this. And that is the purpose of this prediction that is from God. God has given me a voice through this prediction in order to prove this. And so, therefore, when the prediction comes to pass, the controversy is over. End of debate. No more speculation whether it is or isn't. It is the thing. It is the mark of the Antichrist. And to not appreciate that is to miss entirely the point of this video and video channel and this prediction that is from God. Case closed. It is the mark of the Antichrist in its current form. It doesn't need an additional something, such as an additional technology or false form of religious worship, or a supposed new dispensational age. And furthermore, one of the reasons why the vast majority of I don't know about vast majority, but majority of quote-unquote Christians have taken the thing already is that it is judgment for this particular doctrine. One of the reasons. It is judgment for this. If you believe, for example, that the thing can't be the mark of the Antichrist because all Christians haven't been raptured yet, and there's a supposed coming different dispensation that the 7 letters to the churches that Jesus wrote are applicable to and are not applicable to those living on this side of the rapture, this is judgment for that doctrine, which relates to all kinds of things, because Jesus said he is coming to make war with the sword of his mouth on those that teach and have the works that are a product of this Nicolaitan doctrine, which is what it is. Make sure you watch the 23 church signs video. It'll explain what I mean by it being the Nicolaitan doctrine that Jesus spoke about in Revelation chapter 2. And so, anyway, if the commonly held objections that people have based on their knowledge of Bible prophecy, I cover in the snake bite video. Make sure you watch the snake bite video. Okay, so now that we've gotten that out of the way, it is the mark of the Antichrist, and that's what God is pointing to through the death of Michael Jackson at the age of 50. Well, why 50? Well, what is the mark of the Antichrist for? The purpose of it is to test the faith of quote-unquote Christians, the church, which Jesus is very, very displeased with. And this is known because this is the theme of God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel. Pretty much nowhere else are you going to hear how God is very, very displeased with the church. You'll hear elsewhere how God is displeased with the world. But as Peter said, judgment begins with the church. And God is very, very displeased with the church. And this is the truth that will be confirmed when the prediction comes to pass. And that's why Michael Jackson died at the age of 50. The purpose of the end times, furthermore, it's not necessary for a prediction to come to pass to know this. It's very straightforward from the text, from the Bible, that the purpose of the end times and the Antichrist is to test the faith of Christians. That's the purpose of it. But that includes the mark of the Antichrist, which is the thing, which is why most Christians don't know that it is the mark of the Antichrist. Because if it were blasted on a loudspeaker for the entire world to hear, it is the mark of the Antichrist, don't take it, what would be the point? The point is, it's a test. It's a test of things regarding the quote-unquote Christian's life. And as the prophet Hosea said, my people perish for a lack of knowledge. Because they reject knowledge, I reject them from being my priests. And the person in general, I'm speaking generally, the person that didn't know that it is the mark of the Antichrist in general is because they didn't recognize the times that they were in and how dark the world had become and how lying and wicked the mainstream media had become, for example. And why didn't they know? Because they weren't engaged in the spiritual war that we are all in. Had they been fully engaged, which is the purpose or the point of living after becoming a Christian, they would have known. They would have had knowledge. They would have known the things. They would have had known not to trust the mainstream media, for example. They would have, so that's just generally why so many people were fooled. It's the point. That's the point of it. That's why most people don't know it's the mark of the Antichrist. If it were any other way, there'd be no point. I mean, if you get told by your pastor, and every pastor knows all of a sudden simultaneously, hey, we're all in agreement. Pastors know everything, right? And we're telling you now, don't take it. If that just happened all of a sudden, what would be the point? Okay, so all right, so you're going to have to suffer a bit. You're going to have to lose your job or, starve or whatever. But at least you know. But it's deeper than that. It's about knowing. The point is knowing in the first place through being engaged in the spiritual war and having knowledge and knowing what the times are, watching as Jesus commanded. How many Christians, if you ask them, could name one prophetic sign, they wouldn't even understand the question. And they would furthermore miss the obvious one, the Star of Bethlehem. But so anyway, this is why we have this connection to Phil Mickelson's win at the age of 50 on Pentecost, which means 50. And Pentecost, again, symbolizes the church. The Feast of Pentecost symbolizes the church. Okay? The reason is because this date here is exactly 82 weeks after Tiger Woods won his 82nd PGA tournament. Now, long story short, I explained it in the other video, so I won't explain it any more than just very briefly. Tiger Woods is the GOAT of golf, greatest of all time, which is Antichrist symbolism. And he won his 82nd tournament, which tied him with Sam Snead for most tournament wins. And so, and Sam Snead won his tournaments in a different era when it was easier to win. So Tiger Woods was already the GOAT, but it was confirmed with this particular win. And this particular win was on the only tournament in the PGA tournament season that is played outside of the US. This one is in Japan. And If I'm incorrect about that, it's the only one in Japan, but I'm pretty sure it's the only one outside of the US as well. But anyway, it was in Japan, and it's the Zozo tournament, and Zozo in English is a word for a type of demon. And but anyway, the reason for all of that is that God was pointing to that particular golf course, because this sign here regarding Phil Mickelson is all about the golf course. It was literally on the coast of the U.S. near Charleston, and within the path of totality of the Great American Eclipse that passed over America in 2017. And I will explain in a minute how the Great American Eclipse that passed over America in 2017 was for the purpose of identifying the mark of the Antichrist, the thing. I will explain that. But this is why this golf course here. And so this golf course was on Pentecost. But why is God pointing to this golf course? Because it's, and the Great American Eclipse exited the U.S. over this golf course and then into the Atlantic Ocean. So it's a very symbolic location. It's a golf course, and it's Pentecost, and he won at the age of 50. And this points back to Mickelson hits at Michael Jackson. So why this golf course? It's also for the purpose of pointing to the golf course on which Tiger Woods won his 82nd tournament 82 weeks exactly earlier. Now, that tournament was known 2019 for the hurricane, typhoon, that caused biblical flooding. And it didn't just get the golf course soaking wet. It really dumped tons of water, and it was flooded, the golf course in Japan. And that tied to the flooding in Washington, D.C., which I explained in the other video, and on and on. But anyway, because when you try to explain God's big picture of science, it's an interconnected web. And when you try to explain one part of the web, you end up pulling the entire web. But anyway, the reason why God pointed to that golf course with Tiger Woods and his prophetic win with the flooding, which is Noah's flood, judgment, symbolism, is that golf course is the only location in the world in which a particular microbe can be found. And over 4 decades ago, a particular microbiologist who was an avid golfer, a Japanese golfer and microbiologist, took a soil sample from there and then shared it with his colleague in the US, and together they discovered the compound from the microbe that is responsible or is the key compound or the active ingredient in the drug that begins with an IV and ends with an N. You know what I'm talking about. The drug that is the cure for the CVD disease. And God did all of this to prove this. Not only is it the cure, but it's also a prophylactic, which means that taking it in advance will prevent you from getting it. That's right. And the reason why God did all this is to prove this. Of course, if there is a God, he would do such a thing. He would provide the answer to it from his natural world, and then he would also prove that the blue team is on the side of Satan in their effort to cover up the truth about the drug that begins with IV and ends with an N. Okay? And because of the cover-up, by the way, we have the thing. Because the thing was approved with, let me see, what's an older word that I could use? With an urgent permission. Urgent permission. The thing would not have been approved for urgent permission use if there were an alternative, which IV and ending with N is. It's an alternative. So the thing wouldn't even be a thing if it weren't for the cover-up of the drug that begins with IV and ends with an N. Right? And so that's why it's evil. And that's why the left and the political cult of the left is pure evil working for Satan. If you're in this cult and if you come across this video, you need to repent immediately. This cult is also responsible for many for the passing away of many birds. Many birds have died because they weren't able to take the drug that begins with an IV and ends with an N, because of the political cult of the blue team. And collectively, all of the team is guilty. That's how it works. Just like the Nazis, right? The Nazis wouldn't exist were it not for the Nazi sympathizers. That's how totalitarianism works. It requires 30% of the population to be captivated by the lie and the psychological hypnosis of the movement, right? And so anyway, so that's why all this connection for the death of Michael Jackson. And that's why it is 50 weeks. Now, 50 weeks is also 350 days, which is very interesting. By the way, the Feast of Pentecost is also known as the Feast of Weeks. And Pentecost literally means 50 days. And so hence why 50 weeks connections is prophetic also. But it is also 350 days, which is also very significant. And I'm just going to read now why that's significant. The 350th word in Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance is the word examine or judge, to investigate, examine, inquire into, scrutinize, sift, question, specifically in a forensic sense of a judge to hold an investigation, to interrogate, examine the accused or witnesses, to judge of, estimate, determine the excellence or defects of any person or thing, as in the church and the American Evangelical Church. Because God reproves whom he loves. But the American Evangelical Church is the Church of Laodicea, which thinks that it is in need of nothing, and that is because of its doctrine, its Nicolaitan doctrine. For example, once saved, always saved. That is the root of the bad tree that's producing the bad fruit, the bad doctrine, which is why Jesus said he hates this doctrine. And so it's imperative that you know what I'm talking about as to what is specifically is the doctrine, which is why you need to watch the 23 church signs video. Now, in the other video, the Michael Jackson bomber jackets video, I explained the rest of this connection here. The 15 days to the Apple iOS 15 and the 840 days, which is also 120 weeks, which is Pentecost, 120 disciples in the upper room. By the way, they were waiting for fire. Pentecost is symbolized by fire, and that's why these Jackson Pyrotechnics fire sign connects with these Pentecosts. That's astounding. I forgot to mention that. Okay. All right. So enough of that. Now, this date here is also exactly 4 plus 4 plus 4 months after this date, which connects with 4,000 days. And by the way, Jesus fed, the reason why this is prophetic, the 5,000, is because Jesus fed 5,000, and in one of the Gospels, it mentions that he had them sit down in groups of 50 before he fed the 5,000. I should have mentioned that earlier. That's why it connect the groups of 50 and the 5,000 also hit at the 50 weeks and 50 days, and Michael Jackson and Phil Mickelson winning and dying at the age of 50. Okay, so the 4,000 days, though, as my point is confirmed also with the 4 plus 4 plus 4 months exactly. All right. And of course, that's because the 44th president is the Antichrist, who will enforce the mark of the Antichrist through programmable digital currency, which will be programmed to restrict people who haven't taken the mark of the Antichrist from being able to buy and sell food, which will be rationed in the moment of crisis, which is why the Apple iOS 15 was the first to enable the uploading of a driver's license into the digital wallet. Okay. And so back here, though, what I forgot to mention here is that Pepsi in Hebrew gematria, I explained what gematria is equal to 390, and that is a very prophetic number that God uses to symbolize the return of Lord Jesus Christ. It's a number involved in the very important prophecy in Ezekiel chapter 4, but also in the Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance, it is the 390th word is the word for return, quoted by the Apostle James when he quoted Amos 9:11 from the Old Testament regarding the Lord returning to rebuild his temple. And so, anyway, this is about the second coming here, which is what this is all about, ultimately. And that's why this prophetic sign. But the point, what I wanted to say again, is that it's fire, and that connects with these Pentecosts, and the Lord is returning for his church. And Pentecost symbolizes the church. And Michael Jackson died at the age of 50, which symbolizes the church. Conrad Murray in Hebrew Gematria is 969. And that is the age at which Methuselah died at the time of the flood. And this is a prophetic number in the Bible regarding flood judgment. And that's why this connects with this tropical storm sign, which is flood symbolism. So that's, in other words, confirmation of the connection here between the Conrad Murray sign and this tropical storm sign. Also, he was sentenced to 4 years, which is another second witness confirmation to the 4,000 days. And again, the story about Michael Jackson's death is all about the doctor who was sentenced to 4 years, which confirms the 4,000 days. That's very important. Now, what is amazing too is there is a recent documentary on investigation into Michael Jackson and how he died. It wasn't really, this doctor took all of the blame, but it was really, the blame lies with Michael Jackson himself and his other doctors, including a famous one who enabled Michael Jackson to get drugs with 19 fake IDs. So the number 19 is associated with Michael Jackson because he died because of his drug habit, which began after the fire to his hair when he was prescribed painkillers. That began the downfall of Michael Jackson, which ended up with his death exactly half of his life later. And it's all about, it's all about that. It's all about the drugs. And that's why the number 19 is important, because God uses numbers. And 19 is how he got the drugs. He had 19 fake IDs. Furthermore, we are talking about the identity of Michael Jackson. So that's another reason why IDs and fake IDs. And we could also get into, is who Michael Jackson presented himself to be, who he really was, and on, the symbolism for that, right? But anyway, the point is that there's a major news story regarding how he used 19 fake IDs to get his drugs. That is confirmation of this 190 days connection up here. It's straightforward. One of the doctors that was giving him his drugs through the 19 fake IDs was sentenced to 4 years, and he died 4,000 days before this date, which is in turn 190 days before this date. 190 is the 19th triangular number, coincidentally, designed by God, actually, but a coincidence though. So in other words, the number 190 is symbolized by the number 19. In a triangle of numbers, the last number in the 19th row is 190. And I explained earlier, now that I remember, how 19 is prophetic too. It hints at 9 plus 10. 9 equals judgment, 10 perfect order, 19 perfect judgment. But it also hints at 9/11, because God, through the 9/11 events, God pointed to Isaiah chapter 9, verse 10 through 11. But also, this date here is 6/7, and that's relevant because 6/7 hints at the unification of God with man. And this is Pentecost, which is what that also is symbolizes. That's why on the first Pentecost at Mount Sinai, man came up to God and God met man on the top of the mountain. Moses went up to the top of the mountain and God came down to the mountain. The unification of man with God. 6/7. That's why the Jews recaptured the Temple Mount in 19 centuries. Oh, coincidentally, 19. It was 19 centuries after the Romans destroyed the temple and the Jews were exiled. The Jews recaptured the Temple Mount on the date 6/7 in 1967. That's why, because that's what that symbolizes, that Temple Mount. It's high. It symbolizes going up to God and God coming down. The unification of man with God. And so from this date 6-7, it is exactly 6 months and 7 days to this date. This date right here. So that's a second witness, or rather a third witness, because the 19th triangular number confirms the 190 days, and so does the 19 ID. So it's like a fourth witness, okay, to the relevance of this connection between this Pentecost and this midpoint. And that's why the midpoint for Michael Jackson. So now we are coming to the stunning conclusion of this video here. The reason for the midpoint in Michael Jackson's life with the fire, which, as I have been explaining, all points to the thing, which is the mark of the Antichrist, the thing that was used to put the thing inside his body, the drugs, right? This leads us to the midpoint of the eclipses. And as I mentioned earlier, the reason why this all connects to the golf course of Phil Mickelson, which was within the path of totality of the eclipse, is because the eclipse is for the main purpose of it is to point to or reveal the identity of the mark of the Antichrist. Because there are two eclipses. One will happen in 2024, and it will pass over the path of totality of the 2017 eclipse, exactly where it peaked, over the middle of the country. The two eclipses will pass over each other in their middles of their eclipse paths. And that's what an X is. An X is about the midpoint. It's where two lines cross each other to form an X. And the two eclipses will engender an X over the nation. Now, in ancient Hebrew, the X was the Tav letter. And the Tav letter is the last letter in the Hebrew alphabet. And the inverse of the mark of the Antichrist described in Ezekiel chapter 9 would have been a Tav letter. And the mark of the Antichrist changes one's chromosomes, and we have 23 pairs of those. And by the way, that's another reason for pairing 9 and 23 together, which I probably didn't mention earlier. It reveals the identity of the mark of the Antichrist. Ezekiel chapter 9 and the 23 chromosomes, because that's what makes it a spiritual abomination, is that it changes chromosomes, or one reason why it's a spiritual abomination. The other reason is because it uses unbirthed stuff, and you know what I'm talking about. So, in its development. But the midpoint, because the eclipses are all about the midpoint, where they cross over each other, but the midpoint date, as in the midpoint date of Michael Jackson's life, is this date here, December 14th, 2020. And this was the day of the first administration of the thing. The first American that wasn't in a trial, a supposed trial, received the mark of the Antichrist on this date. And there are other things that happened on this date as well, but I won't get into that here. That was a very important date. If you recall, you'll know what I'm talking about. But also, I'll give you one other thing. There was the prophetic 4.4 earthquake on the northwest flank of the tallest peak in Hawaii, where the Antichrist grew up. 4.4 hints at the 44th president, and it was 16 miles deep. In other words, it was 4 times 4 miles deep. That hints at the 44th president. And the name Bama means high place, which in the Bible is a euphemism. The name Bama in Hebrew means high place. And in the Hebrew Bible, it is an euphemism for the false religious worship that the Jews would conduct on the tops of mountains. And in also Daniel chapter 8, the Antichrist comes from the northwest. In fact, the first Antichrist of the two, Pope Francis, comes from Rome, and Rome is exactly due northwest from Jerusalem. But anyway, that's why the earthquake occurred on the northwest flank of the tallest peak in Hawaii on this date that revealed the mark of the Antichrist identity. And the Antichrist is the 23rd, the basketball president that wore 23, and that's why it's 23 weeks from the 4.4 earthquake, which pairs 23 and 44, and God pairs 23 and 44 together in the signs because the 44th president, the basketball president, wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school and will become the president again in 2023. And that's why also 23 weeks is 4 times 40 days exactly, and that also hints at 44, the 44th president, which makes it a second witness to it all. And that gets us to this Pentecost. And again, the purpose of the Antichrist and the mark of the Antichrist is to test the faith of the church. And Pentecost symbolizes the church, which is why Phil Mickelson won the PGA tournament at the age of 50 on Pentecost, on the golf course that pointed back to the cure for the CVD, with the 82 weeks connection to Tiger Woods, as I explained. So I think this is no, there's one more thing here, but this is amazing. So again, we have from the midpoint of Michael Jackson's life, a connection to the midpoint of the eclipses, right? Now, that's so stunning. And it's very straightforward too. It's just amazing. Now, oh, and Atlanta, by the way, is symbolic of Atlantis, which is symbolism for transhumanism, which is what the mark of the Antichrist is as well, transhumanism technology. And that's why the connection to the Atlantis, real life Atlantis. All right. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention, the reason for 328 is because the verse in the Old Testament that describes that is symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist is Daniel 3:28. It is the verse in that chapter that is symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist. Daniel 3:28, which is why the coach for the Atlanta Falcons his name was Dan. So that's why the 328. I forgot to mention that. Now, here's an amazing thing here. So half of Michael Jackson's life, okay, from the midpoint to his death, is 9,282 days. And half of the duration between the two eclipses, in other words, from the Great American Eclipse to the midpoint, from the Great American Eclipse in 2017 to the midpoint, December 14th, 2020, it is 2,422 days. If we subtract the half of Michael Jackson's life from the half of the dates between the eclipses, we get this number, 6,860. But if we take half of that, we get this stunning conclusion here. It is 3,430 days, but this equals 7 times 7 times 70 days, exactly. And that is 3 sets of 7, which confirms everything. Because as I mentioned earlier, God frequently uses 3 sets of 7 to symbolize judgment, because the key to understanding the book of Revelation is the book of Joshua. And as I explained, this midpoint connects to this date, which connects with the 3 sets of 7. I explained that earlier. And it involves the CVD disease with the 90,000 and 110,000, right? And Atlanta is the home of the quasi-military organization that promotes the thing. You know what I'm talking about. That organization that's headquartered in Atlanta. That's another thing about Atlanta. And the reason for all of this connection here. And the march, which is 3 sets of 7 symbolism. The march that the Atlanta Falcons were in. Because the Israelites marched around the walls of security of Jericho 7 times. And then the 7th day they marched 7 times while blowing 7 trumpets. And furthermore, Trump was inaugurated when he was 70 years, 7 months, and 7 days old. 73 days after he won by 77 electoral votes, and 73 days hints at 3 sets of 7. And he won by 77 electoral votes on the day that Benjamin Netanyahu, the leader of Israel, as in Joshua, was in power for 7 years, 7 months, and 7 days. And that day was 73 weeks exactly before the symbolic beginning of Trump, when he symbolically descended the escalator in his Trump Tower. And that day was 188 months exactly after the 7.0 earthquake in Joshua Tree National Park, or Joshua Tree, California. And on and on. But 188 months is because it's a 9/11 number, as I explained in other videos, but also The 188th word in Strong's Hebrew Old Testament Concordance is the word woe, exclamation mark, used in context of extreme judgment from God. And that's what Trump was trumpeting. God's trumpet. In archaic English, the word trump means trumpet or sounding of a trumpet. And through Trump, with his 3 sets of 7 inauguration, as for example, God was trumpeting judgment, as in the walls of security collapsing, which is why Trump's presidency and election campaign were synonymous with his border wall of security. Trump is trumpeting judgment for America. And that's why he's the president that brought in the mark of the Antichrist, for example. Not that he knew what he was doing, though. He was fooled. But anyway, so that's why this is amazing. These exact half durations have hidden in it this 7 times 7 times 70. It's so amazing. Now, I think I've finished this explanation in this diagram here. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Please leave a like and upvote the video. And once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more. Don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, TrumpPrediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the BitChute.com or the Odyssey.com channel. And do it now in case you aren't able to later.